Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'll start by expressing my sincere condolences to the family of Mr. Nijjar and to the Sikh community. You know, in my riding, there are not that many people that are members of the Sikh community as such, but I received a number of phone calls myself since yesterday. People told me these types of things should not be happening. Why aren't the people from the diaspora protected? Clearly, this is the first question one would ask. But we should take a step back and let's take a look at the broader picture. Foreign interference? It did not start overnight. There were a number of discussions in the spring, and in fact, the subject has been on the table for years now. Last spring, I asked dozens of questions, and they remained unanswered. It was downplayed. A number of comments were made calling for an independent investigation, and all of this was turned down. During the spring, the government denied the importance of such an investigation. Requests were simply denied until it was no longer possible to do so. The government was actively passive, if you will, and sped into doing nothing. But this doing nothing was actually allowing for interference. And it's a sad state of affairs when you look at the situation today in the world, in Ukraine, in Armenia. Today, we are no longer living in the era of Walt Disney. There are rogue states, and some of these rogue states, well, we should get rid of our rose-colored glasses at some point. Some of these states are our partners, and some of them are rogue states. Interference can take a number of forms. Clearly, some might refer to it as propaganda through social media channels. You can manipulate the minds of people through these social media networks. You can corrupt elected officials, something that was raised at the Ethics Committee. You can interfere in institutions. There can be direct action, as was the case in Vancouver. But throughout the spring, there was a great deal said about Chinese interference, although my colleague mentioned China, Iran, Russia. Whether we're talking about the committee at the Procedure and House Affairs Committee or at the Ethics Committee, I myself at Ethics heard from people who were afraid, people who said, I'm getting a call over FaceTime in the middle of the day, and someone showing me my grandmother on the image, and it strikes fear in me. We called for a public investigation until that could happen. The commissioner was appointed. September 18th is when that will start. That's when the Prime Minister made the statement, actually, about what happened in June in BC. This was a brutal wake-up call for a number of people who believe that these types of things can only happen elsewhere. But in fact, this happened it happened here. And we learned that on June 18th, 2023, Mr. Nijjar was assassinated, and that India could be involved. How is that possible? It's impossible. India is our partner. We have an Indo-Pacific strategy. We've invested so much. It's impossible, some might say, but it is true. According to Sam Hooper, we're learning that in 2017, the PM's office stopped a CSIS operation because of, quote, some political sensitivity issues, and that was on the eve of the Prime Minister's visit to India that will remain in the books for a number of reasons. But that's not all. In 2019, CSIS reiterated in a report, and it was for Canadian eyes only, this report stated that Indian interference continued unabated. It's been mentioned tonight, but one wonders why. Why is this tolerated? Why is this made commonplace, whereas something like this costs the life of an individual? It can not only cost the lives of some, it can poison the lives of so many. It just doesn't make sense that these things happen. But you just can't say that it can't happen. The government was aware. The Committee of Parliamentarians on National Security said, more often than not, that the government ignored warnings issued by CSIS about China and India's actions in relation to its nationals. So now you got CSIS, the National Committee of Parliamentarians, the PM. You know, frankly, foreign interference, is that sort of a thing these days? Is it due to ignorance of international relations? Is it a lack of courage on the part of this government? Or is it that people aren't doing anything, that we are allowing this interference by not acting? There is a fundamental distinction that needs to be drawn between intelligence and evidence. It really should not jump to any conclusions, but that distinction needs to be made. Intelligence indicates certain things, whereas evidence demonstrates certain things. This is at varying degrees. I have to say that looking at these reports, there is a lot of intelligence, and that begs the question. Despite the fact that there is this much intelligence, the government decided, once again, not to listen to CSIS. I've said it before, and I'll say it again. You know, this is not a perfect, pretty picture. There are rogue states around us. Rogue states will not hesitate to do everything in their power to advance their own interests. There was a Pegasus study at the committee. This Pegasus tool was used by rogue states mostly if there are ways of controlling thought through propaganda, through conspiracy theories, etc. Following what was said yesterday in the House of Commons, our allies, our partners, do not seem to have supported the Prime Minister. And that is shocking to me because back in the days of the two Michaels, the Allied states quickly supported us with no reservations, but there was evidence here at the time. It wasn't an allegation. It wasn't intelligence-based. There's a distinction there. So I wonder, why is there no support here? The government should put forward credible and irrefutable evidence, and if it is to act, it should act in the public interest by putting aside partisan interests. Speaking of partisanship, like my colleague mentioned earlier, these statements seem to be coming up at an interesting time for this government that was mired in a number of issues. And of course, all of that falls behind the issue that we are faced with tonight. At the end of the day, the relationship of trust between this government and the people is being damaged. We require evidence. The government's laissez-faire approach to foreign interference has created some degree of mistrust as to its sincerity to act, and this mistrust is damaging to the public interest. Members of the diaspora need to know that the government will protect them and that the government will act quickly and fairly on matters of foreign interference. The people of Quebec and of Canada need to know that the government has a plan that is credible when it comes to foreign interference, and that it is not just avoiding it, as we saw last spring. I'd close in saying this. You can't have economics trump security, even though Adam Smith says trade equals security. Today we're economic partners with a country that now interferes in our affairs. That just is untenable. We need to put away naivety. We need to look at things squarely. It's a tough world out there. We have to face it, and we need to preserve our dignity and our sense of safety. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.